Baby, baby.
Good afternoon. This is the NotoriousSA podcast. I'm your host, NotoriousSA, aka Steve Anderson, aka Mr. Vote. It is October 30th, 2020. There are a few days left until the presidential election closes, and we will know whether or not we will have a new president come January. What follows is basically a rant I just recorded, but the intro didn't make it. If you're interested, I'm just going to be talking about my predictions for the presidential election in terms of the vote count. Basically, where do we go after it's over? Some critiques I have of the legacy of the Trump administration and the Republican Party as a whole. More importantly, if you haven't voted yet, please do. You can vote early. You can vote by mail, although if you're voting by mail, it might be a little dicey at this point. And of course, places will be open on election day. I myself still plan on being an election judge on election day, just because the day itself, actually most of the day, during the day is pretty boring. You know, there's ads, there's speeches, there's predictions, but really until the polls start closing, and the exit polls start coming out, and we start really digging into the data and really waiting on the results to come in, that's when the excitement comes in. So hopefully I'll be a judge for a while, and ideally people will come in and vote, but getting paid for it, so that's always good. But if you haven't voted, please do. Democracy depends on your participation. Be part of it. Whoever you're going to vote for, just vote. Voting is so important, and I love helping people vote. I love going over the ballots, going over what is there for people. And a lot of people will ask me and trust me with my opinion on who to vote for. And I think that matters a lot because to me, the vote is a very sacred thing. It's your form of agency and power to determine what happens in your government. And I don't take it lightly when people ask me for my recommendation or ask for an honest assessment of what this means and what the candidates are. I really do try to be as fair as I can because I think fairness builds credibility, and credibility is important for us to have meaningful conversations. So for all you people out there, thanks for listening. Make sure you vote, and here is my election day rant. Based on all of the polling predictions that are available, from what I can see, is that it looks like Joe Biden is projected to win. And again, things can change. There's not a lot of time left, and there could be something that's being missed, and there could be a massive undercount of the support for the president. But it's not all possible that, what we're seeing in front of us is actually happening, in that a large portion of the country does not support the current president and wants something different. Again, mind you, not because they're necessarily fans of Joe Biden, but a lot of them are voting for him because he's not Trump. And so, is it possible to get elected by just not being the other person? Seems to have been Donald Trump's motif in 2016, so let's see if he can pull it off again. But in my mind, when I'm looking over the information that's available to me, and I posted this out on my Twitter account about my prediction using 270towin.com, I've looked at the polling over the last few months, and I've compared it to the historical turnout in different presidential elections, and the ranges that are there basically have Biden winning from anywhere between the bare minimum 270 to to a possible blowout of over 400 votes. And while I do think it's going to be a bit above the last election, I don't think it's going to be as comparable as 2008. Just because the partisan nature of it really leads me to believe that if people do come home and the turnout is there, certain red states where Joe Biden may be winning in the polls, it's possible that the support for the president is being undercounted and he can win those states. But in the swing states, it does seem like there's a lot more people who want to vote for Biden than for Trump. So when I did my particular estimate or guess based on the results and using 270towin.com, from what I see here, I've got 186 solid votes for Biden, 88 solid votes for Trump, 63 in the lean category for Biden, 37 in the lean for Trump, and then 86 of them are very much just with the side of the Democrats for Biden, giving him a total of an estimated 335 electoral votes to Trump's 203. Now I get to this because, for those of you who recall 2016, the president's election hinged on keeping all the Republican states, but also winning Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania and Florida. So those are, again, critical to him, but it would appear based on previous historical turnout, the current amount of statewide turnout for Democratic candidates in the 2018 midterms, and the current polling that we have now, is that at those three states at least, the president seems invested in making sure that people he doesn't want to vote don't vote, and that the people he wants to vote do vote, and he's basically banking on using the inside straight of the Electoral College to win again. Which again, as a matter of electoral strategy, is not a bad idea. Because the idea that we have to worry about the popular vote has always been a misconception, because the popular vote does not pick the president, the electoral vote does. The Electoral College vote, that is. Now, the popular vote may often correlate with the Electoral College. Not always, but it can. And there's a good chance that it's going to happen again. And when I say that, I mean that it looks like Joe Biden's going to win both the popular vote by probably a substantial amount, but also win the Electoral College by a relatively decent amount. As in, I don't believe it's going to be at 269 or a George Bush, Al Gore scenario. I definitely think Biden has a lot more of a lead in many states. And again, in my mind, Arizona and Florida are both flipping to him, giving him that 335 edge. So it may not be a total blowout like some people are predicting, and some are predicting a far more conservative outlook where they'll probably put Florida and Arizona still in the Trump column. But still, even if you did that, right, the three states that matter the most, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, the states where he won by the smallest margins, are critical for whoever wants to win. And since all three of these states, again, have Democratic governors and have Democratic senators and have a statewide vote large enough to elect them, it's entirely possible that they will be able to go Joe Biden's way. I don't see any reason why they don't, unless the attempts at voter suppression, we'll just say, work, and really there is this massive drop-off from 2016, which there won't be because the turnout is already almost as high as the 2016 total vote turnout in early voting. The numbers don't seem to indicate that Trump has a real path to victory. And again, people are going to tell you that they have different polls, they use different methodologies, they're trying to factor in the vote that they didn't count last time. But it just doesn't seem like the numbers are there. If you have 10 people voting, I plan on working at a poll site on election day, so because usually the day itself is pretty boring. I mean, like, the day of, people talk about things like how long the lines are, and there'll be some exit polls that come out maybe a little bit earlier, and we're going to talk about what it means. But there'll be a few places that are obvious will go one way or the other. Some super red or super blue states will fall into the categories. But we're going to be watching the battleground states very closely. North Carolina and Florida are two very important states that are on the East Coast that will basically determine how their vote count goes is very likely how the rest of the nation is going to experience it. Because if the numbers are very close, then we're going to wait for probably days to figure out exactly who wins. But if the numbers pull ahead slightly in one candidate's favor, the media will be very hesitant to still call it because they just want to make sure that they don't make the wrong call again and make sure the information is in there. And from what I'm seeing from social media is that they're trying to prevent anybody from declaring victory prematurely before any news agency makes a projection. Now, mind you, when a news agency makes a projection about the electoral vote, they're going to do it based on the records that they see. The official vote count won't be done till afterwards, and it's certified by the numerous different government agencies that do that on a state-by-state basis. We're used to watching election night and watching CNN and Fox and MSNBC or your local station and waiting for the AP to call a state for a candidate. Don't be surprised if this drags out, because if we're waiting on mail-in and absentee ballots to be counted as opposed to in-person voting, now if the in-person voting favors Trump and the absentees vote Joe Biden, this seems to be the scenario most people are afraid of, where the president is trying to basically just get as many people for him to vote as possible and then cut it off as soon as he thinks he's in a position to win. It's entirely possible the in-person turnout will be comparable and that there won't be an immediate lead afterwards, and then eventually when the mail-in ballots come in, it would start to move in Joe Biden's direction. It's entirely possible. And what I'm looking forward to is there's a very good chance, like the last time that there was an election, 2016, right, we didn't have an official call until pretty early in the morning. And even in 2000, we waited weeks to figure that out. Ideally, we won't be in that position again, because it seems to me that a lot of the mistakes from the past elections have been learned. And even in the 2018 midterms, when we saw this massive surge in people voting, that they're going to do their best to make sure that every vote is counted appropriately, and it's going to be reported in a timely fashion. And it just seems like, based on all the available information that I have in front of me, is that Joe Biden is projected to win the presidency. If Trump wins, which is entirely possible, we can probably just expect more of the same. That's kind of the way it is. Trump is who he is, and from all the endorsements he's got, people want him to just continue to do what he is doing. Pretty much every person I've talked to who is a supporter of Trump likes what he is currently doing and blames the media and the Democrats for any supposed lack of success. But if he loses, and whether it's by the thinnest of margins or a massive blowout, there's going to be repercussions down the line. If you're so convinced that your candidate's going to win that when they don't win, you feel this sense of shock or a gut punch or, some sort of bad feeling in your gut, in my mind, you may have invested too much of your personal energy into this. Because as I remember, the night of election night 2016, after I had come back from my election night party, which my candidate lost, which was not unexpected, we were watching the returns, and people were thrilled that Trump was ahead. And, as they kept just waiting for results to come in and seeing if Hillary would be able to pull ahead, there was a lot of shock in the room. just an actual amount of shock that Trump was able to pull this off. And when I came home, my wife was already asleep. At the time, my fiance, she was already asleep. So I was up by myself watching the returns. And when they finally called it for him, and I've told this story before, when they finally called it, I just started laughing. I just started laughing my ass off. Because I thought, wow, America actually did it. America actually elected Donald Trump as president. I guess literally anybody can be president. There was a sense of surprise, but if you were on my end of the spectrum, you thought, well, this is a shocker, but I guess this is the way the system works, so we're going to go ahead and just kind of move forward with it. That was not the reaction that, as everyone can tell, that many on the left and the Democrats and the liberals saw. Many of them had actual panic attacks. Many of them started crying uncontrollably. I had friends who were in dire straits afterwards because they were convinced that Hillary Clinton was going to win, and when they didn't, it seemed like their faith in everything was questioned. Everything they'd ever known had been thrown out the window because they could not believe the country that they lived in, the one that elected Barack Obama twice, would then elect Donald Trump to fill the Oval Office in his place. You know, that's kind of the crazy thing about America, is that elections can be unpredictable, even though it seems like a lot of the time they're not. In fact, the vast majority of races don't even have opposition, so a lot of the time it's either a primary that determines it, or whoever can just get on the ballot. But when it comes to the presidency, a lot of us want to feel like we know what's going to happen, and that maybe we think that if our candidate wins, that we'll have some sense of agency within the federal government, and that at least if I voted for that guy, maybe he'll listen to me. But I also think that if Trump wins, there are far bigger issues in terms of how we collect information and how we talk to people who support the president's party, the Republican Party, or his supporters in general, about how much of them are hidden from the world in terms of the media, in terms of Twitter, in terms of, other sources where they don't feel fully represented. And we're going to have a conversation where we deal with the differences that are causing a divide. Here's the thing, though, and this is just, again, my personal opinion. To say that Donald Trump isn't liked by a majority of the population isn't statistically wrong, right? You can argue that the polls are all biased and that people don't like Trump anyway, but you don't have to have the majority of the population like you or approve of your job to stay in office. That seems pretty clear. At not having the majority of the public approve of you is not necessarily a disqualification from winning. But Trump has just never been in a position where it seems like he wants the majority of the population to like him. He wants the people who like him to like him. And then he will assume that that is the way that the majority should be. For many people on the left, they feel as though they live in a country where a group of people who don't care about them or like them or really want them to succeed at all is in charge of the government, and a minority is dictating what a majority should do. So again, I have my qualms with this particular line of thinking, but on a general basis, it seems like roughly 50% of the country has always disapproved of the president. And, part of that is just partisan differences. Part of it is the president's personal way of conducting himself. And part of it is people just aren't enthused with what the rest of the opposition may look like. But we're still in this spot where days out, people really aren't sure what's going to happen. People don't feel confident about the future. People feel as though war will break out and violence is going to plague the streets and there'll be riots, and sure, in the worst extreme case scenario, that is, theoretically possible. But look what happened after Trump won. There's a ton of protests. People were questioning the integrity of the system. There was a push to get the electors to change their votes. But eventually we all just came to terms with the fact that President Trump won. And we were going to have to just strap it and go for the ride. And man, what a ride. What a ride it has been. You know, when I was listening to Ben Shapiro talk about why he's endorsing Trump as opposed to 2016, I don't want to say he's wrong on all the points he makes, but he does make a few key things I want to address. So Ben Shapiro said that he didn't vote for Trump in 2016 based on the president's personal, the fact that he didn't run as a conservative or have any real conservative value. This year, Ben Shapiro is saying that he is voting for Trump because the president has, in fact, governed in a quote-unquote conservative manner, or a more conservative manner than many people thought, that the Democrats have lost their minds, and that conservatives will face an unfair landscape if Trump is not reelected. And by that it makes it sound like Facebook and Twitter and the mainstream media is out to get them, and they're constantly out to get the president and try to basically keep them all down. Now, say what you will about all those other things, the mainstream media does have its issues in terms of what it covers and how much. The president has acted in a quote-unquote conservative manner on certain, particularly the courts and tax reform seem to be the two things, and the deregulatory state as well. But also, this idea that the Democrats have lost their minds and that we have to vote for Trump because the opposition is just far worse, it seems to be what they're banking on. That seems to be the key point, is that they want to make the Democratic Party to be a bunch of Marxist, socialist, communist, anarchist, Antifa folks who want to massively redistribute wealth, burn buildings, tear down police departments, destroy the nuclear family, all that. Now, if Joe Biden wasn't the nominee, that pitch would probably be... Unfortunately for them, Joe Biden... Right, this is why the president tried to solicit information from Ukraine about him, because they knew that if he ran, all of their internal polling showed him winning. This isn't a new thing. What I want you guys to know is that on the inside, when people do these kind of calculations, right, the president has been running for re-election since he got elected the first time, and it's always been a concern that Joe Biden was going to run, because Joe Biden has a certain appeal to him that can take away at Trump's. Whereas Hillary does not appeal to certain people, both in terms of the very progressive end of her party and with white working class voters, Joe Biden manages to win over people who are reluctant Trump supporters, who are engaged in the primary process. He's got a lot of center-left Democrats around him, but the progressive energy against Trump really isn't a pro-Biden. It's a we're mad at Trump as a person aspect. Like, we don't like him because he exists, because of his conduct with women, and because of the policies that he's implemented. As many people like Ben Shapiro say are quote-unquote conservative, they're not necessarily conservative. As a matter of fact, these same people have changed their definition of conservative to match the current political climate so that they don't feel like they're being hypocritical. For example, the deficit and the national debt were two of the highest priorities of the conservative, basically since Obama was inaugurated. And now we can say that that was also technically true under George Bush, but you know, they blew a hole through the budget many times for many different reasons. But this time, if they ever got power back, they would focus on deficit reduction. Trump even said he would pay off the debt in 8 years. Pay off $20 trillion or so in 8 years. So think about that for a second. But if I'm being honest with myself, those of us who actually care about things like debt and the deficit are very, very low on the totem pole for most people, because to them, they may not like the idea that the government spends more money than it takes in, and that it has to borrow money to make up the difference, and we have to pay that money back. But most people just don't care because the numbers, for one, are so astronomical in terms of it being trillions of dollars. The idea of who that debt is owed to provides a level of complexity that makes people feel like if you try to explain it, that it's going to go way over their heads. And three, as long as my particular party's in charge, spending more money than we take in isn't a problem. Because if my party's in charge, then I know that theoretically we will be getting what we want out of it. And if we try to remove any programs, we'll try to cut it out of the opposition. So of course the deficit has exploded under the president, and we can say that yes, the pandemic happened, so that is a result of a massive spending spree. But the government was running a deficit almost the second he came into office, after going down during the Obama years. This is the weird thing, right? After Obama's first 2 years and Republicans took control of the House and later the Senate, right, the deficit was being reduced year by year because they made compromises in terms of spending and in terms of dropping some tax cuts while keeping others in place. But with Trump, they just reduced the tax burden on everybody and reduced the amount of revenue the government was collecting, and then increased the spending. And this is the crazy thing, is that a lot of the people I've met who are pro-life and vote for Trump are doing so because they think he's fighting for pro-life causes, and because he removed Planned Parenthood from the Title X funding. Not to mention the fact that there are other funding sources from the federal government that Planned Parenthood can rely on, and has subsequently gotten massive increases in funding over the last 4 years. Because again, the president doesn't care. The president is himself in a massive amount of debt and has used that leverage to get what he wants out of it. He'll just spend money like there's no tomorrow, especially when it's not his money, right? If it's investors' money or the bank's money or the taxpayers' money, he's willing to throw it wherever he wants to if it makes him feel better or makes him feel like he's going to win re-election. And I just wish people would care about it more, because when you think about things like the debt and the deficit, right, that goes to the idea of whether or not, if people invest in America, particularly in the United States government and the Treasury and the Federal Reserve, right, that our currency will be sound and it will be worth what we say it is, and the rest of the world can use it as a backup currency. To this day, even though the U.S. government continues to run deficits, right, our ability to borrow money at cheap rates still remains, because the United States is a very credit-worthy institution. And part of that is due to a whole host of other factors that go into what backs the U.S. dollar, what makes its value work. Part of it is that even if we continuously take in less money than we spend, and we have to borrow money, the money that we borrow is at such an interest rate where it's almost essentially either free or it's at a negative interest rate, indicates that the world market still believes in the U.S. government to pay on its promises, regardless of who is at the head of the executive branch. But in order for that idea to work, is that they're going to have to expect to be paid at some point, and that means that we're going to have to figure out a way to basically allocate either more money to or cut spending from other places to make those kind of payments, so that the full faith and credit of the United States remains the standard for the world. Whether or not Trump cares about that is anybody's guess, but I'm going to go ahead and just guess no in terms of the debt and the deficit. Now, when it comes to the courts, this is where you could argue that President Trump has had his best success. And it's not as if the president picked these people himself and has a lot of vested interest in what happens. He's getting a list from the Federalist Society, and he's using that list to pick people, and basically the Senate is doing all of the work from there. Right, since the Senate has changed the rules regarding filibusters for judges, they've basically been able to fill all of the vacancies that they want. Now, people are going to call that packing. I've seen that from more than one place, and that's, just be clear, Republicans aren't packing the courts, right? They're filling seats that are open with their preferred judges. Say what you will about the methods and the tactics that they use to do that, but it's not packing in the sense of packing the Supreme Court. Packing means expanding the size of the court to add your own judges in to give a more favorable opinion to you. Right? That's not the same as there were spots open and we just filled them with the people we wanted. That's saying I'm going to increase the size of the bench and then add people I want on there so that I can get a preordained decision. To me, this is a lot of sour Democratic grapes from their majority leader's decision to change the rules to appoint judges during the Obama years and then not being able to win control of the Senate or the presidency. So, and yeah, you're not allowed to like it. You're allowed to say that this is bull and that the system shouldn't work this way, but it does. And you know, the judicial issue has been one going back years, long before I came on the scene. If you ever want to learn more about it, learn about the nomination and the failed nomination of Robert Bork to the Supreme Court. They can teach you a lot about the politics that go into it. You know, part of it is that a lot of the people in power want the Supreme Court to solve their problems because they're not accountable to anybody. So if they decide on something, it's out of my hands. The Supreme Court decided that abortion is still legal or that money is free speech. So we can just try to counter that through fundraising and getting elected, but you know, the law has already been decided on their end, so I can't do anything about it. And since we have the newest Supreme Court Justice, Amy Coney Barrett, ACB, I've seen a lot of people believe that Roe v. Wade is now in immediate jeopardy. And to be clear, the exact same thing was said about Brett Kavanaugh, and the exact same thing was said about Neil Gorsuch. Every one of these Supreme Court judges is a threat to Roe v. Wade because they're conservative jurists or originalist or textualist or whatever you want to call them. The idea is that they've been appointed by a Republican president. Republicans are pro-life, so therefore they will act in a pro-life manner. Now, I definitely think this is a bit of an exaggeration because judges can change their minds over time. They are lawyers who deal with facts, and not all of these judges are partisan hacks, but actually well-credentialed people who understand the law and understand its place and what the place of the court is in terms of not legislating but interpreting what is and is not constitutional. And the fact that I've seen so many people on the left said that they have to pack the court now because Mitch McConnell stole seats from them really just lets me know that they don't really know how the court system works. Or if they do, they're deliberately misinterpreting the results of people being put on the judiciary. Right? A lot of this goes back to we lost in 2016 and there are consequences for that loss. And yes, you also lost in 2014 and there are consequences for that. People voting in 2010 made the House Republican. People voting in 2014 made the Senate Republican. And people voting in 2016 made the White House Republican. Because of that, the Republican Party has been able to control the wheels of power, well, at least from 2017 to 2019. But again, what happened? They received a trifecta of control. They faced a lot of opposition to stuff they were trying to do, both from the opposition party and within their own, from both a more extreme and a more moderate end. And they weren't able to get much done. The judges are the only thing they agreed on because they couldn't come up with a good healthcare reform alternative that could win over enough votes. They passed a tax reform bill that they kind of just cobbled together and thought would be a game changer when it turned out to be more of a modest reform than anything else. And yes, there's been the right to try bill, which allows people who are suffering from terminal conditions to get experimental treatments, and the First Step Act, which is a criminal justice reform that was long overdue to help people try to get out of the system faster and try to get on with their lives. These are good things that happen, and maybe the president doesn't get as much credit as he should for passing them. And part of that is his own fault, because he would petty fights about himself than actually try to celebrate real accomplishments that the vast majority of Americans will actually be happy with. But, you know, he just doesn't want to or care. But other people did care, right? Other people in the establishment knew there were certain aspects that they had to focus on if they wanted to get their policy implemented agenda. Policy agenda implemented. For the tax people, that was this new tax bill, which they got, and sure enough, seems to be the only real major piece of legislation that the Trump administration can claim is beneficial. The anti-immigration people, oh, they definitely got their fair share, with Stephen Miller close to the heart of the president. And they've been able to basically stop immigration entirely. Most of that is due to the pandemic, but you know, even before that was happening, they were cutting down on asylum, they were banning travel from certain nations, they were trying to deter people from crossing the border, up to the point of separating parents from their children. This has not been popular, and it has received a lot of backlash, and a lot of lawsuits are involved. And for a lot of the conservative movement, legal immigration has always been a key aspect to America's success. Now, there's always been this tough anti-illegal immigrant side of America that has been a major force in the Republican Party that helped Trump get elected, but also in some Democratic areas. There's been a push to, you know, try to be more tough on illegal immigrants, but overall, legal immigration was a key part of our policy because legal immigrants do help take jobs that people don't want in the low end of the spectrum of job pay, and it also can provide skills, doctors, nurses, people who are involved in tech, you know, skill sets that companies need to be on top of their game. Trump didn't believe any of that, and the Republican Party basically just gave up on that dream to make Trump happy and to make all of the hardliners in immigration happy, because the weight of their vote was enough to sink them or to get them a primary challenge, which is unfortunate because since the Bush years and even after the 2012 election, immigration reform was a major component of the Republican Party's success because they had been losing among the Hispanic population and other immigrant populations, right? And they wanted people to vote for them, and since they were already fans of legal immigration, if we tried to fix the system to do that, that would help solve our problems. But no. There has always been a cohort of the Republican Party that I've vehemently disagreed with, who believes that we need a giant physical barrier in the middle of the desert in some places along the border, because they're just convinced that there's these giant flowing waves of illegal immigrants crossing, and ruining America. And you know what? They ended up getting a plurality of the Republican primary in 2016, and they got Donald Trump to be the nominee. And then we all just sort of had to acquiesce to that view. And to our detriment, because the American populace has become way more supportive of the things the Republican Party was supportive of before Donald Trump was president. And it drives me insane, because how are people now more pro-immigration and pro-free trade when Donald Trump was president, when the Republican Party was pushing those for the last 2 decades? And they purposely give up on it because they're afraid of this group of people, of the president's most enthusiastic supporters who have come into positions of power, who demand that everyone else has to acquiesce, or that we are the false conservatives, we are the fake Republicans, because this guy who wasn't a Republican until 2015, whose views will change based on who he talks to, and whose personal conduct is the exact opposite of everything they've ever amplified, is now the person in charge. Just the temptation for power for many people is far too great, and they will give up their personal morals, their personal ethics, and even deeply held ideological beliefs if they think that they will maintain power for just another day. Because as long as they're in power, whatever I say is right. And if it's different from what I've ever said before, if it's in the opposition to all the evidence that we have available, and if it's a naked attempt to appease a person who does not actually care about me, I don't care, because I will still be in power. See it everywhere. People who are pro-free speech all of a sudden are calling for companies to be censored and to be controlled by the government. When have conservatives ever thought that social media was this giant place of conservative freedom and a bastion of ideas, right? Silicon Valley is in the heart of liberal America, right? A lot of liberal people were part of those ideas. But they still built a business that you could use, and to this day has been a driving factor in being able to get their message out. President Trump having Twitter was instrumental in him being able to win. Conservatives being able to use Facebook and Twitter, to a lesser extent, have been immensely important in them getting their message out to people past traditional gatekeepers. The freedom that the internet provides, Section 230 of the Decency Communications Act of 1996, the foundations of how the internet has become one of the best things that's ever happened to the world, is now under threat because people who call themselves conservatives, who want the government out of their lives, all of a sudden want the government in your life because they don't like Facebook. They don't like Twitter. They don't like Google. They don't like these companies that are wildly successful and weren't an issue until Trump was president and started saying stuff that either wasn't obviously true or tried to use the power of the state to go after people he didn't like because people shared bad information about him. Like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me with this? The same people who talked about something called the Fairness Doctrine, a legal mandate to mandate, equal time for opposing views, was an unfair government intrusion into free speech, who have been defending Citizens United because, and here's the fun fact about that Supreme Court case, is that many people tell you it's a license for corporations to buy elections. No, what it actually was about was whether or not the government could ban books. Yeah, you don't hear about that because the result is something that many people on the left don't think is fair, which is that free speech equals money and money equals free speech. Now all of a sudden that they have most of the money, now all of a sudden it's something different, but whatever, right? Why can't conservatives just realize that the writing is appearing on the wall all around us, and why do you have to defend this guy tooth and nail? Because if he undermines the checks and balance systems we have in place, and you give him permission to do it because you want power, and then all of a sudden you're going to turn around and act like you'll be able to stop the other side from doing that, good luck. You've already built the precedent that as long as you are in charge, you don't have to follow any norms or rules, even when it's beneficial for everybody. And if it's going to be a zero-sum game where the raw majority will have the power to do it, yeah, you're the majority now, but you're not a majority of the country. Many people say they are, and there's this silent majority out there that still believes in this Richard Nixonian type of way. No, the silent majority is the majority of people who elected Obama twice and then didn't show up in 2016, who showed up again in 2018. They're not all liberals. Many of them are just moderate people, moderate center-left and moderate center-right people who have increasingly dealt with crazy nonsense and kept putting up with it and not stamping it out because they wanted the votes. And then we lost other voters, so you have to get more crazy people to make up those voters, and then you have to take more crazy positions. The other day I was talking to somebody, and they were asking why I wasn't voting for Trump. Because they're like, you know, we've been talking about this, right? You're against the tax hike in Illinois. You're against cancel culture. You've talked about the 1619 Project and how it's this kind of bad faith attempt to change the narrative about American history. Like, you helped us with Mark Kirk, you helped us with Bruce Rauner, you ran a campaign for a conservative Republican in the suburbs. Like, why are you voting for Joe Biden? I didn't realize you were back to being a Democrat. And again, I have to ask myself, how is it possible that you just said all of those things, but I'm not voting for one person, and all of a sudden all of those credentials are being questioned? Like, people are so caught up with the fact that who you vote for as president is the defining feature of your life. From people who either A, their level of political involvement is basically sharing memes and maybe voting, or people who are just rank opportunists, or people who just get so angry at the world that they have to unload on people they know because it gives them some sense of control over their lives. And I explained, right? I've always had a problem with the president's personal character. I've had a problem with the way he disregards American national security. I've had a problem with the fact that since he's been in office, everything around us has gotten worse for us. We don't have county commissioners. We don't have reps. We don't have House reps. We don't have federal House representatives. We don't have a governor. We don't have a senator. We have no statewide positions. Right? The Illinois Republican Party is dying in front of us. And Trump is responsible for it. Trump repels the people we need to be successful. Sure, he's great down south in Illinois. That's fantastic. Good for them, right? That's not where the population of the state is. It's here. It's here in the suburbs where I live. It's in the city, right? What happens here can determine whether or not we are successful as a party. The same people who, when I questioned them because they didn't vote for Mark Kirk or Bruce Rauner, who were the nominees of the party, who were the already elected representatives of the party, I was the fake conservative for being an establishment sellout. And now I'm a fake conservative for not supporting Donald Trump, who is the establishment, and all of his cronies who then filled in the roles of the establishment. Like, the fact that people are so selfish, and the fact that they just only see their immediate interest as the most important thing, and they're willing to just say blatantly untrue things, and to massive public scorn. How many more times do you have to lose before you get what's happening? How many more times can you possibly get whipped in the media, in the culture, and in elections before you realize what you're doing isn't working? The Republican Party had an opportunity to reform itself when they came out with an autopsy. They had an opportunity to change itself again when Trump won the primary process. They had another opportunity after Trump accidentally won the presidency, basically, and had a real chance at power to really shape things, and none of it happened. Because they put their faith behind a man who has no principles, and he has no moral code, and the only person he cares about is himself. He believes he is America, and America is him, and that if anybody questions that, they are the traitors. They are unpatriotic. And even though we all sit here and say we have a problem with the president's personal character, even though people say, I'm going to vote for him, but I'm not going to teach my sons to be like him, after we've said that I was objected to Hillary Clinton because she has moral flaws and she's married to Bill Clinton, who is himself a sexual predator, we're all just going to ignore that because we just want a naked opportunity to feel powerful. Even if it comes at the expense of our future. And I don't mean America's future, I mean the Republican Party's future. The Republican Party knows it has a demographic problem, it has a messaging problem, and it's had this problem for years, and then instead of actually trying to do something about it, they let Donald Trump win and turbocharge all of the stuff that they've tried to get past, and now their demographic issue is not happening in 2040, it's happening now. It's happening in 2020. Folks, I know this is more of a rant than it is a cohesive podcast. I just want the election to be over. And mind you, I love elections. The presidential election day is like my Super Bowl. You know, I love going over the stats. I love seeing the voter turnout. I like the speeches. I actually like watching campaign ads, if you can believe it. I actually like to judge campaign ads as someone who's made them, edited them, seen them, and talks about them. I'm one of those people who really enjoys the sick perversion that is the onslaught of political ads, but I just want it to be over. I just want this election to be over. I'm concerned that the Republican Party has put all their eggs in a rotten basket, and whether or not the president wins or loses, he's still going to have control over what is supposed to be the center-right faction of America. He's going to have control over an institution that in our two-party system is the only alternative to the Democratic Party. And yes, Joe Biden is the nominee now, but his vice president is the most liberal senator in the country, more liberal than Bernie Sanders, who in the primary accused Joe Biden of being pro-segregation and accused him of being a racist, and threw his entire administration under the bus, the popular administration that people still want. Like, Joe Biden is a very temporary fix on the solution because he's probably not going to run again. And he's already had to make a lot of changes to his own personal standing and personal code to win in this. But once Joe Biden's no longer there, his coalition is not going to hold up. The progressives are angry with the moderates. They do not want them to be in charge. They feel like they have been stepped on for too long. And frankly, there's some crazy people in there who are going to get in positions of power and can cause damage if they believe that they have the moral authority to subject individuals unfairly to the will of the state. Yes, I know that side's always been there, and they've always been sort of relegated to the back, right? But Donald Trump has fueled them in a way that no one else has. And yes, while Joe Biden may have won the day now, his coalition will likely not hold up in the future. And if that coalition, if that side of the aisle starts pushing ideas that really are dangerous and really do butt heads with the idea of classical liberalism and the Constitution itself, there needs to be a center-right counterbalance. The Republican Party used to be that center-right counterbalance. The party of quote-unquote Lincoln, if you could call it that anymore, used to be that other side. They've given it up. They've given up free trade for protectionism. They've given up free speech for government-sanctioned speech. They've given up protection of America's national security to dictators who are friends with the president. Right? They've given up everything for one man's approval. One man's approval whose power is limited by time, and who in days may very likely not even have that basic power anymore. We have to prepare for what happens in America after Tuesday. America will survive. We will get through it, and we will push through together. And from what I'm gathering here, Trump will try to fight it but will lose. Biden will gracefully accept the presidency. There'll be a rush for his spots. There's going to be confusion between the liberals and the centrists and the people on the center right. We're going to figure out what they're going to do and where they fit into this administration. And then we're still going to have to fight the pandemic. Like, the pandemic is still going to be here. We're still going to deal with states that don't know whether they can lock down or how much they can lock down or if the masks are helpful, which, by the way, they are. The masks are helpful. The lockdowns getting a little ridiculous at this point, but we're going to live with it. But we have to have something in America where we have a place, we have a political movement that realizes that there are strong foundational aspects of America that we need to remember, that we need to understand the importance of checks and balances, the importance of things like the Electoral College, the understanding that America is a wide, diverse area which requires tolerance to work, and that if we try to impose our will on other people, there will always be an inevitable backlash. That the best way for us to survive is to survive together in cooperation through a clear set of guidelines, like our U.S. Constitution. It's going to be crazy, folks, but keep your heads up. If you voted, great. If you haven't voted, please do so. Time is running out. And even after you vote, don't give up interest, don't give up hope, and don't give up the fight. Because America needs you to be involved. Because when you don't care and you don't leave, selfish people who want nothing but for themselves will fill in that void. They'll always be there, and they're always waiting for that void. You have to step up, and you have to build the movement you want to see lead. Because otherwise, those who have no principles will do whatever they can to maintain power. And it's up to you to help it for yourself.